The theme, innovation and entrepreneurship, the role of intellectual property rights. Tell us how this can help the development of African economies.
Sure. I'm here to talk about the creative industries and the economic potential for them to help develop countries while preserving their cultures and enhancing their cultural diversity and cultural environments. I think these are exciting times for emerging economies as production costs fall on movies and other cultural goods. They can actually compete with big players like the United States. I think District 9 helps show the world there that there's great cause for hope.
How would you rate South Africa's laws on copyright and intellectual property in terms of helping to develop this fledgling movie industry?
In terms of their strength around the world, they fall about in the middle, which isn't necessarily good. They'd want to be a little stronger to compete with some of the European economies, the American economy. But I think what's particularly important is enforcement. Now, South Africa has made great strides. It has devoted resources to enforcement, but it has a ways to go in terms of education and strict and consistent enforcement to protect creative industries.
What do you think the limitations are? I mean, South Africa is a signatory to many conventions, not least the Berne Convention, which really places special emphasis on what they call national treatment. In other words, if the ideas emanate in South Africa, generated by South Africans, there's room to protect and nurture them. And many argue it's not happening enough.
Right. I think beyond having good laws, you need a good business climate. I think one of the things that would help the South African movie industry, for example, which has a lot of promise, would be to follow the lead of the Koreans in emphasizing building a commercial market that appeals to consumers, makes money from consumers, and doesn't rely on government subsidy. Neither District 9 nor White Wedding last year relied on government subsidy, and I think they're an example of what can be done. The Koreans make $1 billion a year from exporting their cultural products. I think other emerging economies could do the same with the right infrastructure.
I mean, when you look at Hollywood and what happened during the credit crisis, it became apparent that a lot of movies were funded through the involvement of private equity investments and even some of the more established fund managers putting their money into movie-related projects. So when the financial crisis unfolded and the financial services in America effectively took a knock, it had a direct consequence on that industry. And some would argue here the reason why you rely on government subsidies for the creative arts is because nobody else is prepared to fund this area of business.
Right. Although, as I said, White Wedding didn't need to take a subsidy. It was privately financed. And I think what's important about private markets is they have to appeal to the consumer. And those sort of film industries grow much stronger. If you look at the Nigerian film market, they make movies on $10,000 to $30,000 budgets, minuscule budgets, and yet they're exporting their product all over Africa. They appeal to local needs, local experience, and they're a hit, therefore. If you're trying to impose culture above with governments approving scripts, I don't think they would do that. I think there are things in White Wedding that a government bureaucrat would have been nervous about.
Jean-Francois, I mean, as an economist, would you advise people to start thinking about making an investment, and I'm underlining the term investment, in the creative arts? Is that where you're going to see great rates of return?
It's difficult to know what the rates of return will be. I mean, it's always a matter of like risk versus return. Obviously, you do take a risk when you invest, for instance, as a private investor in a film. There's no guarantee there will be a success in the box office. But obviously, and that is just like with many other developing, nurturing industries, new sectors which have a potential for creating growth, but need some venture capital at the beginning, need some people who want to take the risk. So there has to be a structure where obviously investors are aware of the risk and prepared to commit some capital with expectations of at least some return if it works well.
I mean, I think he's raising an important issue here, because just taking you to Silicon Valley in California, there's a direct synergy between venture capitalists and those within the ICT space. They're located so close to each other in terms of proximity, because it's almost as though the venture capitalists are scouting the minds of the techies to see who's coming up with the freshest ideas for them to invest in. We don't have a sort of a Silicon Valley type setup in the entertainment industry where people are saying, show me scripts, show me ideas, show me production, and I'll put in money into it. There's a total disconnect between those who can afford to finance projects and those who are thinking creatively and coming up with these intellectual property elements.
One thing South Korea did was in 1993 it recognized this as a potential emerging sector, something that could do as well for them as Hyundai did with cars, which they were very proud of. And so the government embarked on a policy of tax preferences, tax credits to encourage investment. Rather than directly subsidizing the films, they encouraged private investors through their policies to get involved. And I think that's what needs to be done, as I said, because you want a commercial market that sustains itself, not an art house market that doesn't appeal to the average consumer.
What about issues of security of ideas? That's the first thing. And secondly, piracy, because it's one thing for people to support the creative arts, but you want those films to be seen mainstream, to be at the box office, and to be collecting those revenues through existing, well-established, safe distribution networks.
Absolutely, and I think there are two parts of the film industry you need to focus on. First, there need to be theaters. Theaters can't be pirated. You buy your seat and you go in. And right now, the theater market has not reached the emerging consumer in South Africa. And I think there's a huge opportunity there that's going untapped. That if entrepreneurs could reach this market, it would grow the home market. And secondly, you need to protect the DVD market. And that requires proper enforcement and a recognition of the financial importance of the industry.
Let's move the conversation, Jean-Francois, just beyond what we're seeing in the entertainment industry, and just talk about the general environment for nurturing fertile ideas, innovation in a country like South Africa, for instance. We once spoke to the Minister of Science and Technology, and one of the things that she laments constantly is that not enough people are patenting ideas in this country. You're hearing about South Africans or Africans doing interesting things, but by the time you wake up to that fact, they've patented the idea internationally and not locally, and so it's out of the ambit of developing that idea into a viable business or industry locally.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's probably linked partly to the skills issue, you know, partly linked to what I call the soft infrastructure, the government regulations, the different doors on which to knock to get these patents registered, and also the brain drain. You know, quite often more will be offered to these creators, to these innovators, if they go to Europe, if they go to the States. I mean, even Europe has been suffering from that. With a lot of European inventors, whether they go to the States, network of universities, which can be budding areas for such projects, is typically an advantage of the United States or of many other regions. So I think there's a holistic approach that needs to be adopted here in South Africa. Get the right bureaucracy to deal with these issues. Get the right doors at which people can knock. Get the right climate in universities. Get the right climate in government to encourage the growth of such ideas and the patenting in South Africa, the creation of these projects in South Africa.
And a final and brief comment from you. How can technology help? And I'm talking here about things like open source, where people can then develop their ideas through an open medium, distribute it to a wider audience, and hopefully then start to channel their ideas to those who can finance them.
Oh, sure. There's many different ways to use intellectual creations and to license them. You start with the property rights, and open source is one way to use your property rights, to open them up partly to encourage development. And that often can be useful if you want to develop a service provider model, which can be quite lucrative.